Ship 31, the sparking ship from 2 months ago, has finally completed its cryogenic proof campaign at Massey's. We have a possible rollout and static fire of Flight 5's booster, as well as an abundance of heat shield work on Ship 30. If that wasn't ample action already, Hurrican Barrel is barreling towards South Texas, and there's much more to come in your Starbase update. Let's start with Ship 31, which after 7 weeks in the high bay getting repairs was rolled back out to Massey's for cryogenic proof testing. If you don't remember, which I don't blame you, we have had a Starship flight in between. On May 12th, Ship 31 suffered a small explosion on its raceway from what we think was a blown composite overwrapped pressure vessel or COPV line. These lines run from the COPVs in the nose cone down to the tanks and engine section. This explosion started an electrical fire which damaged Ship 31's raceway and aborted the cryogenic proof test. Shortly after this anomaly, Ship 31 was rolled back to the high bay, where it spent the next 48 days getting what looks to be an entirely new raceway and probably replacement avionics. Now fully repaired, Ship 31 rolled back out to Massey's early this week and performed a couple of cryogenic proof tests before once again rolling back to the production site. However, this time around, Ship 31 went into the front right corner of Mega Bay 2 to shelter from Hurrican Barrel, which we will discuss later. With its cryogenic proof testing out of the way, SpaceX now needs to install its engines and thermal shielding before rolling it back to Massey's on the new ship static fire stand. Usually this process takes around 2 months or so to complete. Once engine testing is completed, the question will arise as to whether SpaceX will do the same thing to Ship 31's heat shield as they are currently doing to Ship 30's, and the answer to that is most likely that SpaceX will want to prove the new heat shield designed first. With all of that still in the future for Ship 31, this vehicle may not be ready to fly until November of this year, so we will have to watch closely as this may be the final version 1 ship to fly. Let's move over to the launch site, where this week we saw Module 1 of Orbital Launchpad B's tower rolling out, and if you're like me wondering what on earth a module is, that's what they're calling the segments. Unfortunately, due to what appears to be alignment issues, which we'll talk about in a minute, SpaceX did not stack the section, even though teams installed the lifting eyes onto the section. With the CC8800-1 crane being laid down, it likely won't be stacked until later this week. As you can see, SpaceX has done things a little bit differently this time around for the tower module and for the tower as a whole. The reason why the team are having these issues could be explained by the changes for this tower, so let's dig into them. For starters, the original tower started with a smaller pile cap, using fewer pilings, but they were larger. This new pile cap has many smaller piles, creating a more stable foundation for the tower to sit on. So with the first tower, SpaceX built a concrete and rebar base and then built the first section piece by piece, rather than just stacking it on as a whole section, as they did with the Starship pad at LC-39A and how they're now doing it for Starbase Pad B. Another large change from the first 2 towers is that this base has hollow steel walls and columns with Nelson studs that help the concrete and steel bond together once the concrete is poured in. These columns and walls are bolted to the pile cap via embeds, and the walls and columns are welded together. With this change, SpaceX requires 4 adapters to attach to the 4 base columns along with the 4 truss connections on the last 2 towers so that the first section can be installed. This means the workers need to make sure that all of these pieces are aligned correctly so that there isn't a cascading alignment issue all the way up the tower. As you can see here, workers are trying to shim and align these locations and maybe getting slightly frustrated. The good news is that SpaceX has a decent amount of leeway with a structure of this size and can probably be too high by even a centimetre or more without many issues. They can have this play because the chopsticks would just need a programming adjustment, and the ship quick disconnect is already designed to move up and down a lot. Remember, the entire Starship stack shrinks a lot when fully loaded with propellant because the temperature changes. That being said, SpaceX should be able to figure out the issues one way or another, and hopefully it is not a major problem. In addition, SpaceX is now adding all of the commodity lines and propellant lines into the tower sections before stacking them. Compared to the first tower, as you can see here, which was just the structure when it was stacked 3 years ago. In addition to the tower being started, SpaceX has been quickly adding more and more pilings in a large area where the pile cap for the orbital launch mount will be located. In other news regarding this tower, sections 4 and 5 are still at the port of Brownsville, along with the chopstick carriage and the arms to accompany it. Now, on another note, for those who watched Tim Dodd the Everyday Astronaut's recent Starbase tour with SpaceX CEO Elon Musk, and if you haven't, why haven't you? Go watch it, it's amazing. You may remember Elon mentioned that this second tower would be taller. Unfortunately, we haven't seen any sign of it yet. Considering SpaceX wants to get this tower stacked quickly, such extra parts for another section would have to arrive sooner rather than later, but it is something to keep an eye out for in the coming weeks if that is actually the plan. Travelling to the other side of the launch site, it's now the end of an era at this launch pad. All of the old vertical tanks at the Orbital tank farm have now been removed, and SpaceX is in the process of destroying the foundations where those were sitting. As to the question of what might go there in its place, well, there are 2 new methane tanks sitting at Sanchez, which, with a containment wall, could absolutely be placed in that open space. We'll just have to wait and see, as always, what SpaceX does. In conjunction with that, SpaceX has been pushing right along with preparing Orbital Launch Pad A for Flight 5 and the potential catch of Booster 12. Alongside those preparations, teams recently replaced one of the main propellant lines that hooks into the ship quick disconnect. The ship quick disconnect was damaged during the past flight when one of its supports was broken. In order to fix this, the teams had to disconnect the main actuator that deploys it, which has yet to be reconnected. Coming up shortly, the Orbital Launch Mount has another job at hand, hosting a 33-engine static fire from Booster 12, but before we can talk about that, we have to talk about Hurrican Barrel. As I mentioned earlier, SpaceX had laid down the CC-8800-1 crane in preparation for a possible direct hit from Hurrican Barrel. Before hitting the Gulf Coast, the storm earned the title of the first ever major hurricane in June and July of a hurricane season. Fortunately for the Gulf Coast, the hurricane has weakened since making landfall in the Leeward Islands, Jamaica, the Cayman Islands, and the Yucatan Peninsula. This hurricane has also had to deal with lots of wind shear, which has weakened it. But make no assumptions, it can still cause flooding and wind damage as it is expected to strengthen while it is still over the Gulf of Mexico. In preparation for a possible hit, SpaceX has laid down all of its large cranes, transported a plentiful amount of equipment from the launch site to Sanchez, and stored lots of equipment inside the Star Factory. As of this recording, Beryl is slated to miss a direct hit on Starbase and the Rio Grande area. Landfall is currently predicted between Corpus Christi and Houston in Texas. There is still a good chance that there will be a couple of feet or around 60 centimeters of storm surge, even if the hurricane stays offshore. With each new update from the National Hurricane Center, Beryl's landfall location becomes increasingly clear. As you are watching this video, assuming you're watching it when it is released, any possible effect of the hurricane should be in full swing at Starbase. It goes without saying, but just in case, official forecasts and information can be obtained from the National Weather Service and the National Hurricane Service, both of whose websites are on your screen now. Moving on to Flight 5's vehicles, we have the possible upcoming event of Booster 12's rollout and static fire, which has been delayed because of the aforementioned Hurrican Barrel. There are movement closures for 12 to 3 in the morning and 12 to 3 in the afternoon local time on Monday, July 8th, which is the day this video comes out, but also when any possible hurricane effects might be in full swing. So Booster 12 might be at the Orbital Launch Mount by the time this airs, but there's also a good chance it might not be. There is also another backup closure from 12 to 3 in the morning on July 9th. Along with the movement closures, we have 3 testing closures on the schedule this week. All 3 are from 8 in the morning till 8 in the evening central, classic testing closures on the 9th, 10th and 11th. So, assuming there are no issues regarding Hurrican Barrel, we could see a Booster 12 static fire by the end of this week, and if I were you, that notification button might be of use this week. Now, don't expect to see a hot stage ring rollout for Booster 12 for its static fire, because SpaceX didn't do that for Booster 11. We will probably see one of the new white booster caps that was used on Booster 13 when it went off to Massey's for cryo testing. It's a quick and easy way to protect the forward dome of the booster without the hassle of a hot stage ring. And if you want a shirt to commemorate a Booster 33 engine static fire, I may be able to recommend this one from shop.nasaspaceflight.com. Let's move on to Booster 12's other half, Ship 30, which is still getting a large quantity of work as crews work around the clock to get its heat shield replaced and redone. At this point, we've seen a considerable amount of work, so let's take a look at some of the changes we've spotted. After tearing off all of the tiles, felt and mesh on Ship 30's tank section and nose cone, SpaceX began to install the new setup. For starters, this setup is only on the main heating parts of the nose cone and wraps most of the tank sections, but not up to the edge of the heat shield. The first layer of this new sandwich is the new ablative material that Elon Musk had talked about, which we believe could be Pyron. Pyron is a carbon fibre based material that would ablate away as the plasma hit it, like the current heat shield on Dragon, Starliner or many other capsules in the history of space exploration. Come to think of it, every capsule in space exploration. The next two layers have already existed on past Starship heat shields, and those are a felt material and a mesh. The felt provides insulation and the mesh helps to keep the felt flat and makes it easier to install the tiles. The top layer is the tiles. As far as we can tell, there are no noticeable differences in the new tiles. The part about them being twice as strong most likely has to do with the material composition rather than the thermal properties. So far, this has all been on tank sections that have pins. The areas that don't have pins and require glued-on tiles appear to not have been started just yet. Along with the tank sections and the nose cone, the flat parts of the forward and aft flaps are also getting the new ablative material. A new blue gap filler material, most likely room temperature vulcanized silicone or RTV silicone, has been spotted on the aft flaps. This material can be placed as a gel into a gap and then it will cure at room temperature to form a gasket sealing the gap. Depending on the mixture, RTV silicone can withstand temperatures around 340 degrees Celsius. Now before you ask, isn't re-entry heating much hotter? Well, yes it is, but the tiles act like a heatsink and can hold the filler material together. We still have to wait and see what, if anything, SpaceX will do to the flap seals that failed on Ship 29, damaging at least one of the forward flaps. Teams still have a long way to go in finishing this massive project, which leads to the question of when Ship 30 and Booster 12 will fly. Well, recently, Elon Musk posted on X, formerly known as Twitter, that he expects Flight 5 to happen in 4 weeks. This is not impossible. However, the more likely timeline could be around 6 to 8 weeks, meaning the middle to end of August, or even a push into September. As always with Starship, there are a lot of unknowns. However, it's safe to say that we are still at the sit on your hands end of the should I buy a plane ticket scale. So with all of that information, when do you think Starship Flight 5 will launch? And when do you think SpaceX will fully stack the tower at Orbital Pad B? Let us know in the comments below. For now, I've been Caton for NSF. Thanks for watching and goodbye.